Hello and welcome to season 2 of Scheming, the Place North podcast that gives property folk a platform to talk about 3 schemes they think about a lot. I'm your host, Dan Whelan, Deputy Editor of Place Northwest. Today, I'm speaking to someone who has dedicated a large chunk of his career to the affordable housing sector and who, since 2018, has been spearheading one of the world's largest investors' drive to deliver more discounted dwellings across the country. Joining me today to talk about 3 schemes he thinks about a lot is Ben Denton, Chief Executive of L&G Affordable Homes. So before we get started, I just wanted to ask you a few questions because we're a Northwest-based publication or a North-based publication, and most of your career has been spent in the South, I think it's fair to say. So just wanted to sort of introduce you to our listeners, so to speak. And I know I was doing a bit of research beforehand, and I know that back in the 1990s you worked for KPMG. And that was kind of what brought you up to the Northwest for the first time. Tell us a bit about that, how you sort of started out, and a bit about your time at KPMG, because you got involved in some interesting stuff there, didn't you?
Yeah, it was a really interesting time. I mean, I worked for a surveyor's firm in London. Actually, I come from Leeds originally, so I'm a northern bloke, but not the Northwest. So yes, I joined KPMG. It was a fabulous team. We were working in London at the time, and then I met this really sort of inspiring person who was heading up regeneration of Liverpool. So I moved up to Liverpool and worked for KPMG there. It was around the time there was lots of European funding, so things like the Development Corporation. The Development Corporation existed in Manchester, and also in Liverpool. Did a lot of work for both those development corporations. Really interesting large scale projects. Worked on some really interesting things like the funding of the arena in Manchester, which was fabulous. So again, and I guess all of that work inspired me to think about what was possible in great places with great people. With a lot of tenacity and vision. It's amazing what you can achieve. Manchester at the time was going through. It was around the time of sort of just before the bomb for the Arndale Centre at the time. So obviously that was a big change program. And then things like we were working on things like the funding of the Manchester Conference Centre and the Bridgewater Hall. So some really interesting projects at the time. Worked with some amazing people. Sir Howard, who was leading for Manchester at the time. So it was a formative time for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And 3 huge schemes that you've mentioned there, the GMEX, Bridgewater Hall, the arena, and now obviously Manchester has another large arena as well. So it just goes to show how far things move on. In 2011, you became a board member of Westminster Community Homes. And kind of since then, so that's after your KPMG days and some of the other jobs you've had. And since then, you've sat on the board of Thames Valley Housing Association and Sovereign Housing Association as well. And there seems to have been quite a clear shift in your career trajectory towards the affordable housing sector. Is that fair to say? And
Yeah.
what prompted that?
What prompted that? It's a really interesting question. I guess it was before my time at Westminster. So I worked after I left KPMG and after another job after that. I worked for a really sort of inspirational sort of startup developer, and that developer was trying to basically build more, I guess, maximize the number of houses that could be built and maximize the affordability of housing as well. So it was a sort of key worker project at the time in London. So that was an interesting project, and as part of that, we worked on the Olympic Village in London when the Olympic Games was in London in 2012. So this was about 2007. And I guess that gave me a taste for how can we deliver great quality housing in the affordable housing sector. I then moved to Westminster and looked after Westminster City Council, looked after a few bits and bobs there. So planning, housing, homelessness, adult education, transport. And again, that sort of, I guess, embedded my view of affordable housing. You look at people who are struggling and saying there's nothing like providing a house at the end of the day to give people some firm foundations from which they can sort of build better futures. And then it's sort of rolled from then, both sitting at a board level on some organisations, but then also doing operation stuff in developing and operating affordable housing.
Fantastic, yeah, and it's we're going to hear a little bit more about that that company, that startup that you mentioned in a little bit later on when we're talking about the three schemes. But just before we get into those, I want to ask you about affordable housing itself, because on a lot of stories that we publish, the comment section is gets kind of filled up with people saying these aren't affordable. Affordable housing is the definition is at 20% below market rate, right?
Yeah.
But we know that wage growth and inflation has not necessarily helping the affordability question, is it? So, what do you think about that when people say that this isn't truly affordable?
It's a really good point. So in broad terms, if I think of what we're developing today on average, the average rents that we charge when we look at across everything across the country, it's probably between 50 and 60% of market rents.
Okay.
So whilst you can charge up to 80% of market rents, I think it's fair to say, as you're saying, Dan, there's not many people that would find that as affordable housing. So that's the first thing. The second thing is when we're looking at customers moving into affordable housing, we're always setting the rent at about 35% of someone's gross income.
Okay.
So whether someone is on housing benefits or whether, let's say, they're struggling and providing care and supporting a dependent, but at the same time doing a contracting job where their income's relatively low, we're always trying to set rents at about 35% of someone's net income, and that's pretty similar right across the sector. The interesting challenge, I guess, is there's 4.3 million affordable homes in England today. The vast majority of those are social rented homes. They're at the lowest. They're the most sort of the lowest rent homes. But when we look at those homes on average, um, they might be they might be £20 or £30 a week cheaper to rent, but the energy costs for those homes are probably £30 to £40 um, a week, sometimes more expensive. So we're always looking at the total property cost for a customer alongside what the rent is.
Okay, that's really interesting to hear you sort of break it down like that. And my last question before we get into the schemes is, L&G Affordable Homes is for profit. If you're charging such low rents, how do you then make it sort of viable in this
Yeah,
market, which we know is so challenged and so constrained?
yeah. So again, it's a really pertinent question. So I guess our business is funded using institutional capital. So basically, pension fund cash. So if you've got a pension, I've got a pension. Some of my pension fund is invested in affordable housing. How do we make it stack up? We make it stack up because our business is operating just slightly more efficiently than the rest of the businesses operating in the sector. How do we operate more efficiently? We are a digital business, so that helps to design out failure and waste. We're obviously operating generally newer homes, so those are more cost effective to operate. And I think the thing I'd really like to get across is the profits we generate effectively go to pension fund holders. So the vast majority of profit we generate goes to the average person on the street who holds a pension. Quite a lot of our third party investors at the moment are local authority pension funds. So of course it's public sector workers who have been contributing into those pension funds, and then those pension funds are helping to build new affordable housing. So we're saying we're using society's capital, which is pension fund capital, for society's benefit. So it's a benefit to the pension fund holder, but it's also a benefit to the customer who's living in those homes.
Brilliant. Fantastic. So let's get on with it, shall we? As you know, on today's podcast, I'm going to ask you about three schemes. So without any further ado, let the scheming begin. First project we're going to talk about today is the one that you're most proud of. So, a long and distinguished career, what project have you chosen for the one that you're most proud of?
So today I've chosen Hart Road. It's a project that we're delivering at the moment. Why have we chosen that project? I mean, it's a whole host of things. It's so Hart Road is in a little village called Thundersley, which is in Essex. It
Fantastic
was
name for a village, Thundersley. Love
Thundersley,
that.
exactly. It's an interesting place because there's very little housing that gets built in that local area, and very little affordable housing. So that was the first thing. There's a long housing waiting list for people to get on the affordable housing ladder there. The second thing is that this was a difficult site. So what today is probably called a grey melt site.
Mhm.
But when we were proposing the project, it was a site in the green belt. So of course, very difficult to get planning permission in this local authority area, and getting planning permission on a green belt site was also difficult. So the interesting point there about being about effectively squaring that link between trying to deliver affordable housing in a local area, because it's a big housing waiting list, but very little affordable housing being delivered. We The planning process there was quite lengthy, uh,
Mhm.
but and to be able to go through the planning process there, we had to say, well, how are we going to deliver a scheme that is unique and special in that area? So the uniqueness and specialness of that site was all about how do we deliver a net zero carbon housing scheme, and also delivering biodiversity net gain. So effectively, it was we were going through a journey of squaring the challenge between not enough affordable housing in a local area, a real queue of people wanting to get on the affordable housing ladder, designing and delivering a scheme that was net zero carbon in operation, which means that the energy costs for the customers will be super low, but also the almost the environmental benefit of delivering the scheme is significant, but also the social benefit of delivering the scheme is significant. And at the end of the day, it cost a little bit more than an average housing scheme to deliver,
Mhm.
but the saving on energy costs for the customers justifies the additional costs that were involved in that scheme. So it's a great scheme. It's virtually finished. Looking forward to the first customers moving in at the end of this year.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, a relatively rural setting for this scheme, and you mentioned it being a greenbelt site. How was it received locally? Because you mentioned a lengthy planning process, and sort of the burden then is on you as the developer, isn't it, to show the
Yeah.
benefits of a scheme? But how was it received locally at first?
So it's interesting from an officer perspective, a planning officer perspective. They were supportive of the scheme being consented. From a member perspective, they were not supportive of the scheme. In terms of local, we didn't really have any local opposition to the scheme being delivered. So that was, and it is actually it's a even though it's a green belt site, it's actually part of a village. So it's a fairly small scheme. It's about 50 homes, 50, 60 homes.
Yeah.
So it was more the interesting challenge we had there was the political processes. We also had an election halfway through, local election, which gave rise to different members who, of course, didn't want to consent it. So it went through the refusal process quite quickly, and then it was heard at appeal quite quickly,
Okay.
and then we got the scheme into appeal. But that was interesting because officers were recommending it should be approved.
Yeah, we see that quite a lot at the moment, in where the politicization of the planning system, and it must be very
Mm,
frustrating. We see a scheme, it's Stockport, for example. This happens quite regularly
mm,
recently for various reasons, where the officers will recommend something for approval because there's a clear need, or they can't prove the 5-year housing supply position, for example, and it'll go to committee and it'll be refused, and then it's
yeah.
just delaying the process. Is that getting better generally, do you think? Is the planning system becoming less politicized, or is it getting worse?
Oh, that's a really so I think it changes massively in different areas. I mean,
Mhm.
I used to look after planning for Westminster City Council, which was fabulous. I mean, I really enjoyed it, and you saw the challenges really for members, where they're saying, well, we on one hand we want to support the delivery and growth of our local area, including housing or commercial accommodation, and then at the same time they have to represent their electorate who may be
Mm,
unhappy with housing or commercial or offices being built next door to them. So it's a real paradox for those for members, and I feel for them. I think you then see some local authorities that have a level of confidence and are bold. So leaders, senior members, officers, all aligned together to deliver positive outcomes. And you see those places where that works really well. Manchester is a fabulous example,
mm.
where it's managed to be bold, but it's still requiring developers to be ambitious as well in terms of what they can deliver from a housing perspective. Um, is it more difficult today than it was, let's say 3, 4, 5 years ago? I think it's probably we've gone through a bumpy time period. So it used to be easier, and
Mhm.
then it went through a period with the last government where the system got gummed up a little bit, and it's becoming ungummed now. Just as an organisation, roughly, we think today we have to be taking between 2 and 3 times the number of sites through the planning system at any point in time to deliver the same number of affordable homes, because the system is relatively slow, and it's not just planning and consents, but it's things like building safety regulator. That's a new system that's come in for a very sensible reason, but that creates delay. So as a result, to deliver the same amount of output, you've got to be doing 3 times the amount of work compared to what you might have had to do maybe 5, 6 years ago.
That's really interesting. And I wanted to ask you as well about how you think the new government is doing, because you actually spoke at one of our events last year, which I think was just before the election, but it was looking like Labour were going to win. And you said, "What I hope with a new government is that people can get real about the amount that needs to be delivered." Do you think that that's happened? Do you think that Labour has brought in a sense of sort of realism about the size of the challenge? And obviously, it set its 1.5 million homes
Mm.
target. And generally, how do you think they're performing in this space?
Yeah, I think sorry, it's a big old task to move from, let's say this year, maybe 150, 175,000 homes might be built because the market is shrinking rather than growing. And then obviously the Labour government has come in and wants to dial up to be delivering 300,000 homes each year. I think my first reflection is this government has started to, I guess, unburden the process of delivering homes, which is good. And obviously, first steps on reforming planning to enable that to happen. The challenge is you need to look at the whole system. It's not just the planning system. It's how many planners there are, how many contractors there are, how many developers there are, and things like the Building Safety Act slow down the process as well. That said, I think it is absolutely right to set an ambitious target. 1.5 million homes within a government
Hmm.
is a really ambitious target, because unless you have something ambitious to aim for, um, people won't necessarily align with the direction of the ambition. Um, this government as well has announced in my sector more funding for affordable housing, which lots of people have been asking for. So that's really welcomed. It's looking at longer term rent settlements. So I think it's lining up all of the activities in the right way. The headwinds are it's a very, very volatile world economic climate, and all of that volatility um, creates headwinds that sometimes even this government can't control. So, for example, greater uncertainty on borrowing rates because of tariffs and the impacts on stock markets around the world and bond markets. I think we live in a world that's much more volatile and uncertain today than, let's say, it was if I look back to the 2010 to 2020 when COVID came in, although we did have the financial crisis then, and but maybe the 10 years before. So I think it's increasingly difficult um, for governments to create policies in a world that's much more volatile. almost you then have to have much longer term policies that go beyond the term of a government.
Mm.
So thinking about building a housing market over 20 or 30 years, rather than hoping you can set some ambitions over 5 years, and then another government might come in or there might be another election.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, isn't it? You know, you could put in place this 20-year plan, and then if there's a change of government, they might decide to rip it up. So you need that cross-party collaboration as well, I guess.
Yeah.
Just back to Hart Road, because I wanted to ask about the tenure mix there. What tenures are being offered at that scheme, and generally across L&G Affordable Homes projects? What is the tenure mix?
Yeah, so on that scheme, it's a higher proportion of shared ownership.
Okay.
I think it's about 65% shared ownership, and the balance is rented. Um, that why is it a higher proportion of shared ownership and rented? It's because at the time we were planning that scheme, there was more grant for shared ownership than rented.
Okay.
If I think this year, how many this year probably in 2025, we'll hand over maybe about 1,500 homes. Probably about a third of those will be social rents, so the lowest rents tend to be between 30 and 50% of market rents.
Mhm.
Um, there's probably going to be about 25% shared ownership, and then the balance will be affordable rent. So for us, affordable rent is probably from 70% of market rent down to about 60% of market rent. So on average, we expect to be going forwards to have about 75% of our homes will be rented and a smaller proportion being shared ownership.
Yeah. There seems to have been a lag in the north around shared ownership. There's a lot more shared ownership properties in the south than there is in the north.
Mm.
What do you put that down to?
Yeah, it's so the benefit of shared ownership is that um, someone who wants to move out of private rent can buy a stake in their home with a smaller deposit than
Mhm.
they would have otherwise been able to deliver. So all other things being equal, if someone could save up a deposit earlier, they can move out from a rented home into a shared ownership home earlier. I think it's been more popular in the south, so particularly London. Let's say over the last 30 to 40 years, because housing was less affordable
Mhm.
in London, and therefore that was allowing basically people to get on the housing ladder. What we tend to find as we go further north is people might have been able to afford, let's say, a one or a two bedroom flat, and what they can actually do with a little bit more of a deposit can buy maybe a small three-bedroom house, so they
Mhm.
then can stay in that home for longer. The other thing we notice as well is because interest rates have changed and because market rents have gone up significantly. Nowadays, in broad terms, the property outgoings for a shared ownership home, in broad terms, are about 80 to 85% of market rent. So obviously that's changed compared to what was the case in the past.
Fantastic. So let's move on to the second scheme we're going to talk about today. So this is the one that you wish you had done. So you could interpret this in various different ways. So some people interpret it as, you know, they see a scheme that they were never involved in, but that they admire and they really wish they'd been a part of that. Or it might be one that got away, one that you were involved in and then never came to fruition. So how have you interpreted this, and what is the one you wish you'd done?
So Dan, definitely the latter. So back to my days of I'd left KPMG. We set up an advisory company, and then we sold that company. And then I met someone who had a fabulous vision about how could you deliver beautiful quality schemes at a lower construction cost, so that you could maximize the amount of housing that people could afford. And taking ourselves back to this was the sort of early 2000s. It was a time when everyone was focusing on key worker accommodation. Actually, nothing is new. There's a focus on key worker accommodation today, but so there was this whole program called the Key Worker Initiative, and it was focused in London. Um, so we bid as part of a consortium to be able to have access to a few sites in London to deliver these key worker schemes. So each key worker scheme, you bought the land off the government. You try to maximise the number of key worker homes that were part of the scheme, and we were always trying to deliver a beautiful scheme at a lower cost. We pulled together a really interesting set of schemes. All of them got planning permission. So one was, for example, at a place called Elephant and Castle, which is just sort of south of central London. A beautiful 44-story tower designed by Sir Richard Rogers. So that had about 50% key worker accommodation. We had another fabulous scheme down in Greenwich, in sort of southwest London, that was that required a swimming pool to be built underground as parts of the scheme as well, for that the local authority was going to operate. And there were a couple of other schemes that we delivered. So we were in a brilliant position. We got planning permission for all of these schemes, and we built some of them. But then the global financial crisis came and bit us in sort of 2007-8. Unfortunately, a couple of the projects were funded by a bank called, they put equity in a bank called Lehman Brothers. Lehman Brothers
Mm.
disappeared overnight.
Oh,
So
yes.
people walked out of their offices with their cardboard boxes the next day. And so that's a classic, journey of, I often say to our business, timing is everything. Timing is everything, both in a positive sense and in a negative sense. And also, if there's an opportunity for you to deliver, then try and speed through and deliver it, because you never know what can be coming around the corner. What was brilliant about those schemes, the ones that got away, is other people picked them up in future years and then delivered them. So they're lovely, beautiful schemes. And it's always nice, I think, when you pass something and say, and you're proud of it, and you were involved in a little bit of the process. You might not have finished it, but at least we started those schemes.
Yeah, you got the ball rolling, so to speak. Um,
Yeah,
tell me a bit more about that 44-story tower in Elephant and Castle, because you mentioned that you're trying to maximize the amount of housing on a site, or you're trying to do it for less money. But a 44-story tower in Elephant and Castle can't be cheap. Tell me a bit about how that worked in terms of you keeping the costs low, and being
yeah.
true to that model that you were trying to achieve.
Yeah, so of course costs were a different order of magnitude compared to where they are today. Um, the site was tiny. I mean, it was a tiny site. So it was a terrace and a tall building on the site. I think the second point is it didn't really have any major infrastructure costs, as it was right next to roads and bits and pieces. No car parking on the site as well, so no complicated basements underneath, because it was probably about 100 meters from a tube station and 50 meters from fabulous bus transport. So from that perspective, what you had to do was try and maximize the amount of development on the site. The second point was the government agency that led that initiative, which is a predecessor to Homes England, was always willing to take a view on how much the land was worth, because in a way they were foregoing land value, which was a cost to them, in lieu of maximizing the amount of affordable housing. And then it was it was a really interesting bit of work, because you were always looking to design really efficient buildings.
Mm.
So with good gross to nets, that were efficient to design and build with, and designing out complexity, and designing in reproducibility within the building. So I think nowadays, to try and do something like that would be quite tricky.
Did you consider modular as an option? Because that's something that obviously is not a new thing, but it's been rearing its head again recently. The need to speed up the delivery of new homes, and doing it at scale. Could it be cheaper? Could it be viable? Is that something you looked at then, and is it something you're looking at now?
Yeah, so at the time we were using modular components. So we used bathroom pods in pretty much all the schemes we did in London at that time. We were using bathroom pods. We'd sort of been taking some of that learning from the student housing sector. It was less of a developed market at the time. I mean, in relation to modular, obviously L&G has historically had a modular business,
Yeah.
which it's worked on modular. It's quite difficult to make modular um, stack up and work, particularly given planning challenges. That said, I think, certainly I'm passionate about the ability to use components and sub-assemblies and bring them together to improve quality and drive down costs on a scheme. But lots of people have tried in the housing sector to use sort of sub-assemblies and components and done it pretty well. I would hope that we do more of that in the future, and it's possible to do it more by having a stable market.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
uh,
Yeah.
wh- and when we look back to, for example, when when sort of mass manufacturing techniques for housing had been used in the past, not very successfully, but nevertheless, people did apply them at great scale. It was when there was clients delivering large volumes of housing so that they could create a pipeline and have reproducible demand.
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it? Having the pipeline in place and having that certainty in terms of timescales. I think from the people that we speak to, the general consensus is that volumetric in terms of whole, a factory that builds houses and then plonks them in a field somewhere, that's the most difficult way to do it. But as you said, components, bathroom pods and panelized systems, they are being used, and I think we're going down that route of seeing them being used even more. Just back to the company that you work for. What was the name of the developer that you were working for at that time with the ambitious
It was
plans for?
Yeah, it was a company called First Base,
Okay,
which
and
was a
what?
nice name. Yes.
Yeah, and what happened? So you mentioned the financial crash. Was that it for First Base? Then it
No,
didn't.
no. The company carried on going, and we delivered some really interesting projects, like as I said, the Olympic Village at Stratford,
Mhm.
and then we created a joint venture to own the affordable housing there. The business has then got split up, and the original owner of First Base still owns it. And there's another company called Socius that was sort of spun off and continues to do what First Base was delivering back in the sort of early 2000s. So trying to deliver beautiful quality schemes and maximize social impact. I mean, interestingly, L&G Affordable Homes. There's a scheme down in Brighton where First Base was the developer, and L&G Affordable Homes bought the affordable housing off that scheme. So it's a small world.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. You always bump into these people again, don't you?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, let's move on to the third and final scheme today. So, the final scheme is the dream scheme. So the one that, if money was no object, you would pursue. It could be St John's Cathedral being converted into apartments, the reimagining finally of Piccadilly Gardens in Manchester. I'm sure you're familiar with that particular area of the city. So let your imagination run away from you, if you will. What is your dream scheme, Ben?
So it's interesting. It's more a sort of program,
Okay.
and it's very northwest based. So it's very Manchester based. As you might know, so Greater Manchester Pension Fund has invested in L&G's Affordable Housing Fund, and there's lots of really interesting schemes right across the Greater Manchester area, which can be delivered, which have a sort of significant affordable housing component. So one of the challenges I think that I've seen in Greater Manchester is there is a fair amount of affordable housing being delivered, but there's a desire to try and create more affordable housing in the center of urban areas.
Yeah,
So to
sure.
to try and maybe if the last the early maybe over the last 10 to 15 years the growth of Manchester has been about growth. Now it's how do we deliver inclusive growth. So what I'm really excited for in the future is to be able to deliver affordable housing in Manchester in some of those urban areas using Greater Manchester Pension Funds uh, funding alongside other funding to deliver some of those great schemes. There's a lot of schemes coming through that we're discussing, with Greater Manchester Pension Fund, working with Manchester City Council and some of the other local authorities. And so the ability for us to play our part in dialing up the delivery of affordable housing in Greater Manchester is really, really important. And so that's my sort of dream scheme at the moment, is how can we get from 1,000 additional affordable homes to 2,000 to 3,000 affordable homes in the Manchester Combined Authority area. In a plan, I mean, the overall plan over the next 10 years is to deliver 30,000 affordable homes. So how can we be 10% of that? I guess that's what I'm excited about, but it's also the thing that's challenging as well. But exciting because it's possible.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is positive to hear. And I know that, again, to speak about our readers who, have very, very strong opinions and are very well informed about what's going on in the market, and they would say that obviously, as you know, not enough affordable homes are being delivered in those urban areas, and it's
Mhm.
we need them there as well. That's where the city centre is for workers, so you need places for them to live. I just wondered because we wrote a story about the most recent investment from the Greater Manchester Pension Fund in L&G Affordable Homes at the start of the year,
Mhm.
£100 million, and we mentioned in it a scheme in Charlestown in Manchester, 150 homes on a 10-acre site. Uh, Tell me a bit about the delivery method. So, will you always take a scheme through planning and deliver it, or would you acquire? I'm thinking
Yeah.
Solboy are developing a standalone
Mhm.
23-story affordable scheme in the city centre. That sort of asset, would that be of interest to L&G Affordable Homes as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's gone through planning this week or last week, hasn't
Yeah,
it?
last
So,
week. That's
so
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
so the so yeah, it's we tend to work with developers. So Hart Road is an example where we designed and built that and delivered that all ourselves.
Hmm.
In many other areas, we are working with developers in local areas because they've got the skills, capabilities, they're taking the scheme through the planning process. So effectively, we are forward funding that scheme, and either them or their contractors taking that build risk. I guess what we're really interested in looking at in Manchester is where are the schemes where we can invest and it unlocks other housing to be delivered. So it might be that affordable housing can be delivered alongside build to rent. So it unlocks not just the affordable housing, but it enables a further phase of build to rent to be delivered. Or if it's a mixed commercial scheme, looking at that as well. So we've got quite a few conversations with people like Muse who have a number of projects right across the Greater Manchester area. Some smaller contractors and developers, and then some other organisations that have bigger regeneration sites. So we're tending to look at lots of organisations at the same time, and then trying to line up a program so that each year we can be delivering 3 or 4 or 5 schemes. The aim is to be delivering is to be committing around £100 million a year into additional affordable housing in Greater Manchester.
Okay. And would you look at refurbs as well? Because you mentioned the environmental credentials of the scheme in Thundersley, and obviously we know that embodied carbon is as important as operational carbon as well. So would you look at refurb schemes as well? I'm thinking, like Welsh Streets in Liverpool, for example,
Yeah.
that sort of project. Is that something within
Yeah, it's
the
a really
scope?
interesting. Yeah, so it's an interesting area. I guess we always look at where are the adjacent marketplaces. So
Mhm.
to start with, it's easier to build and operate new affordable homes, and then you build the capability to then use those skills to move into the retrofitting, the purchasing and retrofitting of existing homes. That's an area we're really interested in at the moment. There's a big growth sort of strategy within our business to figure out how we make the maths in that area work. And I guess it's a different set of social outcomes compared to let's say building new affordable homes. Building new affordable homes is adding to the stock.
Mhm.
Improving existing affordable homes is all about improving is decarbonising society and improving the health and well-being of homes so that we can improve customers' life outcomes as well. So it's a different set of social and economic outcomes we're looking at when we're thinking about buying and retrofitting existing stock.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have one final question for you before we wrap up, and that is, what's the one thing that you would change if you could, that would have the biggest impact on your ability to achieve that dream that you've outlined there?
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting one. So it's we look so we look to other businesses to sort of take our cue. And the story I love is about AO.com, a great northwestern business.
Yeah, absolutely.
A bet between a fabulous businessman and his mate that he couldn't disrupt the white goods market, and they bet each other a pound. And we look to organizations like that, to say, what can we learn from them? And they did two things. The first thing, they built their fabulous platform off a really simple technology platform, which is what we did when we set up. So we are a frictionless business with a great technology platform. And the second thing, and we haven't quite got there, is they figured out that to deliver great customer service, they needed to own the logistics company. So he bought a logistics company, and that was the breakthrough journey to get them to being a FTSE 250 business. So for us, it's getting to that point where we have a vertically integrated business, so we can directly link the customer together with the repair operative with the technology platform, so a customer is in control of the service that they're being delivered by their suppliers. That's the breakthrough that we're seeking to deliver. And if we can do it for our business, and we're only a small business, we have about 8,000 homes being operated or under construction at the moment. But if we can do that and prove it, then hopefully other people will copy us, and it will be a benefit for all of the customers that live in the 4.3 million affordable homes.
Fantastic. Ben, thank you so much for your time today and for talking to us about your three schemes and everything that L&G Affordable Homes does. And thank you very much for listening at home or wherever you are. Please do join us next week for another episode of the Scheming Podcast.